Therapy. Activity. Fusion jazz.
It's yacht rock.
Yacht rock.
Yeah.
Therapy.
Anyway, it's that slinky guitar. It's like this.
We'll put that in one of those things that we turn upside down. Yeah.
Welcome to the Integration Station. I'm your host, Michael, a child and adolescent occupation therapist. And with me today
is Eleanor. I'm also a child and adolescent occupational therapist. How are you, Michael?
I'm good.
Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. What are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and generally it comes from questions from our listeners. So if you do have any questions, please shoot them through to us. OTFC Group on Instagram still, yeah. And podcast.otfcgroup.au is our email address. So we can continue to discuss the things that people want to hear and hopefully find the fun in learning about that. I know there's a lot of laughter that we have at times.
That's just, I'm like one of those, what's that thing that you've got at Plus at the moment that like turns up and upside down?
Oh, the cow.
The cow. Just like a laughter track.
Yeah, one of those things. My son was scared of that when he was younger. He hated it. So I had to hide it. I think he's tolerant of it now, but it's one of those ones where you tip it over, it goes, that was a bad cow. Like that sort of noise. You tip it over and it makes the cow sound. Anyway.
I'm glad you gave that another go.
Let's go with therapy activity of the week.
Therapy activity of the week.
Okay, sweet. What do you reckon? Michael, what's your
therapy activity of the week?
That felt good. In unison.
Jinx. What did I do this? I did use. Okay, so I was playing badminton. So we have a little badminton net at Mile End.
Yeah.
Which is quite useful. You can do lots of things with it. You can play volleyball. You can reduce it the height down to do a tennis sort of game. But we're doing badminton. But the client I was playing with was finding it harder to do it with the shuttle. And so I used a balloon. And so it gave more opportunity to, one, a much bigger target.
Yeah.
And two, more opportunity to
slower moving.
To slower the movements and to be able to get set to hit that balloon over the net. Yes, obviously it's harder because the balloon doesn't go as far as hard as the shuttle does, but it at least gave that person a chance to set themselves and have a bit more success with the balloon instead. So that was quite useful. The other good thing about the balloon I find is, so if we're talking about that vestibular processing, that head being off, I'm lifting my head up like that for those that can't see, but that head being off that equilibrium, that center point there, means that they're having to track with their head and their eyes, and they're looking up, and there's a lot of eye-hand coordination that goes into that activity. And just being able to process that and the way that the muscles and joints of the back and the arms and the posture has to adjust to hit that shot. With a balloon being up higher means that there's even more of that position being set and having to really track the whole way. It's cool. It's good.
Yeah.
Easy
Keepy
way
Uppy's a good one for home as well,
actually,
you know?
Keepy Uppy, yeah.
Classic.
Yeah. That's actually lots of things you can do with a balloon. Always good.
And what a great grading option within that to make sure that was that just right challenge. Shuttle, too tricky, not having much success, but still want to practice that skill and work towards that. So just shifting that element to make it more achievable. That's really cool. I think mine is I went back to incorporating in like an obstacle course, but the Philly bag game where you get a pillowcase, you put a bunch of random objects in there, and so they'll go through the obstacle course, they reach into the bag and they have to feel for an item. The way that we were playing it is I had put a bunch of random things in there. They were having to use describing words to indicate aspects about the item and then having to then guess what they thought the item was. So really targeting that tactile perception, to use their touch system to try and discriminate what's in there, but also that communication piece to differentiate if something was smooth or bumpy or what shape it was, and then being able to then communicate that with me. And then that became then the homework activity that we gave the family to do between that session and when we see them next, because that's absolutely something that you can practice at home as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
Always love those ones that has, very functional outcomes. Like I'm thinking of, when you're reaching into your pocket or a bag and you're feeling around trying to find your keys and you have to go through everything else that's in the bag for you. It's something that we use all the time, but just in a way to practice that skill in a way that's fun and engaging and using things that motivate that young person, which actually probably flows into a few things that we'll talk about later with functional outcomes and
that's true.
How we target that in ASI, but we'll come back to that, won't we?
The other thing I'm thinking of sometimes I use talk about for parents is when you're driving in a car and say there's something going on in the back seat with the kids or something and you're trying to reach behind and go stop it with the hand, but you can't actually see because you're driving on the road. But if you've got that tactile awareness, you can know, I'm grabbing someone's foot as opposed to doing something else. But yes, related.
See, so many practical applications.
Regulation strategy of the week.
Theme song first.
Regulation strategy of the week.
I don't know how we got Marco Babel to do that song for us. Goodness me.
He was in Australia recently, so he couldn't not. Mine, I'll start off, is the medicine ball.
Oh, what have you been doing with that?
Well, my son wanted to buy one the other week. So I had to go to Rebel Sport and buy a medicine. He didn't want to get the cheap one. He wanted to get a really good one. Anyway, it was his money. Like he saved for it and he really wanted a medicine ball. So we got a 4 kilo medicine ball.
I have so many follow-up questions about what inspired that for him.
Well, I think he'd been using it at his early learning centre.
There we go. That's all. Yeah.
And so he was really interested in
cool.
that. And he just loves to have heavy work stuff,
That's
so
cool.
the medicine ball was a really easy way to transfer that within the home environment. He hasn't used it as much as I'd like, but at the same time, certainly a really useful strategy to have, outside. You can roll it, you can use it as a like a bowling ball instead. You can pick it up, you can drop it. Just carrying it from place to place. There are lots of different things. If someone is able to catch it and they've got the skills to do it, throwing and catching it can be safer and effective as well. But just that consistent pressure applied through the muscles and joints from the medicine ball is
that's cool.
It's quite useful. So pretty regulating.
I think mine's a bit of a flow on from that. I've just been loving and not everyone has different preferences when it comes to these sorts of things, but just jumping or running and crashing into a pile of pillows and using pillows from the couch. My little nephew actually has reached a point now, I think sometimes when I come over, he's like, oh, cool. When Eleanor comes over, we do jumping and crashing, and he just loves it. He'll jump on the couch. I'm positioned, we've got everything set up so he's not falling off the side. But he'll jump and crash into pillows, and then I'll grab another pillow and give him a big deep pressure squish, and he'll just go for ages doing that. And we actually did that just before tucking in for bed, and he just conked out that night after his usual routine, which is, I think, just a really positive thing, again, for that proprioceptive sense and the impact that can have on the nervous system.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Just I think pillows have become my favourite thing to use at home. So versatile.
You can sleep in them or you can crash on them or you can
make forts,
fight with them,
make walls.
Forts. Yeah, pillows. There you go. So that's an activity of the week. Do something with a pillow.
And a leg strap.
And it can be a reg strat too, yeah. Bit of both.
Options.
Love that. Maybe next time we get together, you're going to have to do both. Like a therapy activity of the week that's also a reg strat.
Okay, combo.
All right. That's your task.
We're going to mash the song up.
We can mash the song up. I'll get Eli to do that. Anyway, let's get into
laughing but surely rolling the eyes at the unneeded task in between the next episodes.
He's got plenty of time. He's got plenty of time. Let's get into some questions for today. So we've had some topics that have come through from questions in previous episodes. Today I kind of wanted to touch on something that I've been discussing more with families of late. Before everyone turns off, can I just say this? The big thing I did want to talk about is functional capacity assessments. Now, as I said, not the most exciting thing. I get it, but really important.
But important.
You know, it's one of those things where it's like you should know about them. They're everywhere. You hear the terms all the time. But I still have lots of parents saying, NDIS want me to do a functional capacity assessment, or they've said something about a functional assessment.
Yeah.
And, you know, my thoughts are, if that's explained to a family properly, they know what they're getting into.
Yes, that's true.
So it's hard. Like, I know NDIS have a lot of, you know, people they service, but at the same time, I think there is information on their website about what a functional capacity assessment is, but that's not always accessible. And anyway, long story short, this is certainly one way that we can support our families and anybody else out there to understand a little bit more about functional capacity assessments and what they are and what they're about. But I did want to maybe just talk a little bit about how something like a functional capacity assessment came about.
Yeah.
So I like history stuff.
Bit of history?
Yeah, I've got to fact check some of this stuff, but from what I could understand, this is kind of where it's come from. So I guess from an early perspective, the whole point of functional capacity assessments had its roots post World War I, I think it was, when OT sort of came about, and those assessments were designed to look at how someone has managed post-war injuries and other things and rehabilitation. And that rehabilitative medicine is where the occupational therapy formed. And so the whole point was to determine the needs of soldiers and what they were able to do based on injuries and the things that have occurred. And it really emphasised functional limitations rather than just medical diagnoses.
Yeah.
So that's where that, I guess, you could almost attribute the essence of we're looking not just at the person's diagnosis, we're looking at functionally what they can and can't do, where that came from. And so that sort of moved forwards to, later in the mid-20th century, 50s through the 70s, there was a real push towards ergonomics. And you would have seen in that era of 60s and 70s, there's some really funky designs and other things and changing your desks and tables and workplaces and all that sort of stuff very much was around work-related functional assessments. And that, I guess that still has continued on to now. So there's a lot of people that work in the organizations that look at vocational rehab. And so sort of, through to the 90s, there was that movement towards, assessing a workplace and ensuring that seating positions and tables and chairs and the environment itself was effective for work and how that would then support a person's ability to engage in their daily activities at work. And those functional capacity evaluations became more widely used in things like workers' compensation and liability and again, vocational rehab. So if we fast forward to now, obviously with the NDIS that's been here for about 10, 12 years now, the functional capacity assessments have been used in that way to provide more assessment of eligibility for the NDIS and also where those needs are. So if we go right back to the start, it's coming back to, rather than medical diagnoses, it's about what's the limitations of that person as a result of their disability. Yeah.
I guess it's trying to look at the whole person too, isn't it? They're very comprehensive in what it looks at. Yeah. So, yes, there might be some of those developmental considerations, disabilities, but what does it actually look like for that young person in terms of how they engage in things they need to do, routines, behaviours, emotions, school, to try and put that picture together about what support requirements might look like and as such what services they potentially can access funded through the NDIS.
Yes, exactly. And they are pretty big. They're big documents. They're supposed to be pretty comprehensive. They're almost like the story of that individual to give a bit of a snapshot of everything about that person, strengths and challenges. And as you said, why something like NDIS or why supports are required to assist that person to do the things they want to do in their life. So there are components to a functional capacity assessment and what they cover, and they cover areas of physical functioning, they cover cognitive, they cover communication skills. Like, while there's no specific way to do a functional capacity assessment there's no set template that NDIS want or anything specifically that they say it has to look like this. It just has to cover particular areas. I mean, they talk about self-care and daily living, participation in the community, economic participation, employment, their environment, previous history, and all those things get covered through a range of, whether it's either questionnaires or in-person assessment, bit of both.
Caregiver consults.
Yep, consults, absolutely. And the one thing I'd say is, just for those that are listening that maybe work more in the child adolescent space, that, as you can hear, historically, a lot of functional capacity assessments have been for an adult population. So these have been designed to work with adults. And so now it's being pushed more towards working with younger people. And so it can be more challenging because there are different needs for each individual and different needs for young people, because they're still under the care of caregivers. But the functional capacity assessment is aimed at providing the most comprehensive assessment of that person's needs and their level of independence.
Yeah. And I get that it's become a bit of a gold standard, I think, as well, in helping NDIS determine eligibility and funding options and what supports they believe would be helpful for that young person and their family. I would say to anyone who's listening, because I think as a result of that, the term is used a lot within various communities. And so I would just say to anyone who perhaps has heard about that or interested in learning more around it, I'd certainly recommend just checking in with someone like your plan manager or to find out what the need for that would be. I think it can be really easy to jump to a process like that, but it's important to understand, well, what would the purpose of that be? What's the outcome we're trying to achieve? What would this supportive document be assisting within?
Yeah, and I guess that's how they're used, and I guess FCAs for NDIS, families might have within their plan that they have an assessment for a functional capacity assessment as part of their funding. Yes. And they might be uncertain about what that is. And I absolutely, as you said, I would certainly encourage them to ask that question to a local area coordinator or even to their OT, who would be able to give them more of an idea of what that actually entails. But yes, those functional capacity assessments are used for a number of reasons, and sometimes it is for change of circumstance to justify supports, evidence of funding, or if, say, someone is low on funds or has run out of funding, to use that to say, to advocate, we need more funding because this person continues to need support. And maybe there wasn't enough funding initially outlined in the plan, therefore the functional capacity assessment can be used to provide greater evidence as to why that support is needed.
And I guess you're hearing all that. I always say that to families going through this process, that it's so tricky, isn't it, to try to reduce someone's experience to within this report format, but knowing that it is to serve a purpose. Yeah. And it's something to assist with something that you might be requiring out of your funding. So it's just getting really clear about what that's being used for and what you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah. And, I often have that conversation with parents where I'm like, as a therapist, I know this person needs support, and I can see that needs support. Yes. I can see that there is a need, and parents go, why do I need to get a document to prove this? And I say, well, if you consider it in this way, this is, the NDIS is an insurance agency, and therefore what we need to do is to make sure that the effective evidence is there to provide the insurance for this person, like any other insurance policy, to be able to provide that information about why funding is required. Yeah. And if you provide enough evidence, then then, my opinion is I think that you should be able to get the services you need. I know at times that's not always the case.
Yeah,
and
it's
it can be a battle. But this process does at least provide a pathway to having the right information being passed on, and that conversation to occur with more evidence and more weight.
Yeah.
So again, for those that are uncertain about it, hopefully this provides a little bit more of an insight into what it is, bit of a history about how it came about as well. That's
the only reason I'm here.
That's fine. And then also when it's required, because I think some people hear it and go, should I do one?
Exactly.
And then just to clarify that, because it's not always required, but certainly when it comes to funding being less or a plan coming up for review or those sort of, I guess, transition periods, it can be quite a useful way.
It certainly has a place and a purpose. It can be a really important piece
absolutely.
within that if you're needing it.
So if I were a parent that did do a functional capacity assessment and did want to engage in therapy, and it was through, say, an ASI-based therapist or a child adolescent OT practice, how would I explore functional goals through, say, a play-based or ASI approach?
Yeah. And I had that question from a parent this week who had asked around, I think they must have been going through some discussions with their NDIS planner and some of those functional goals that they were working on in terms of dressing and building independence in toileting. And, they've been engaging in ASI-based sessions for some time. And, the question that I had was, can you just help me relay that all back together? I know it's helping and I see so much progress, but with these really specific functional goals, what does that look like? And this is a young person who needs a lot of support in dressing and, even sort of just recently being able to help him pulling socks up has been a really big achievement, which is brilliant. But I guess when I think about those functional goals where ASI comes in, it's these foundational skills that we work on that underpin broader fine and gross motor skills, but also all the tasks that we do in our day. And what ASI does is work on these in a really fun, play-based manner with the idea that these then generalize into other spaces, other skills. It's essentially addressing the building blocks for these functional outcomes. But I do think that there is a role to do that really explicit teaching as well, whilst you might also be potentially bridging any gaps within those foundational abilities. So that dual approach is really important.
So I guess what I'm hearing then is that instead of it just being a building blocks foundational approach to skill development, it's more transactional where there's some top-down sort of stuff that's supported as well, and a way to go, well, there are some things where explicit teaching can come in from the top down, and then building those bottom-up skills as well at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, even thinking about if I was looking at this specific task within dressing to put our shoes and our socks on, building that into a game that we need to have our stomping shoes on to knock down something in an obstacle course, and it becomes a part of the game. We're practicing this explicit skill, but the motivation has changed. It's maybe become something a little bit more fun or playing into those interests, because we know through play it's how kids learn so much, but taking those opportunities to build the specific abilities that we need to as well.
So one question that I might throw to you on the spot is that sometimes there's I'm not going to say misconception, but sometimes there's the argument that some of the stuff that we do in clinic or some of the clients that we see struggle to generalise.
Yes.
And find it hard to generalise those skills that are learnt in here out into the population.
Yeah.
So
very true.
So then how would you, I guess, answer that question, or how would you address maybe difficulties that might be present with generalisation of skills?
No, I think that's really fair. And I do, with that transactional model that you referred to before, I suppose the idea is that continuing to build the underlying skills that we need to do, routines, other things we want to engage with is still such an important part of what we do. And I guess we'd be sort of working towards potentially that over time, that generalization, we might start to see it generalize between activities in sessions and then start to see it have that flow and effect outside of the space. But that's where I think that explicit teaching, those splinter skills, like we often reference, where it's actually, if there's something we need to learn to do, like tie our shoelaces, yes, I'm going to build the building blocks for that in, so many things. But I guess like that touch perception, isn't it? To understand how the laces are positioned in your hand. You have to have that coordination of both sides of the body to use both at the same time. You have to be able to plan and sequence to put multiple steps together. You've got that fine motor control as well, a little bit more broadly. So that's what I mean by the foundations. And we might work on that in a variety of different ways that are really fun, engaging, child-led. But then I might also be going, but it's going to take us time to build that. So whilst we're doing that, let me show you a few tips and tricks. Let's do an analysis of the task. Let's break it down. We'll practice it step by step, and we'll do it across the weeks, built into other things that we're doing, so that we can still teach that skill, grow that independence, whilst also still supporting the building blocks.
And in that, I'm hearing that the ASI therapy is a component of, but there's also that, as you said, that more functional, I guess, if you want to say top down, or if you want to say more of that explicit motor planning sort of teaching of a skill to allow for generalization. But you're absolutely right. I think the whilst generalizing skills can be trickier, if you're able to teach those foundational skills, you're able to work on, whether it's areas of touch perception, of proprioception, bilateral coordination. They're not just going to help doing shoelaces.
No.
They're going to help in a lot of other ways.
Absolutely.
And that, I guess that's the fundamental, the crux here of the difference in the ASI therapy, maybe to say another approach that would explicitly teach a skill is to say, we totally get that person wants to work on that skill and we can do that, but our aim is to also be quite holistic and broaden the skills across the board. To go with working on fine motor skills in a range of areas, working on bilateral skills in a range of areas and in a motivating way. And I love the idea of the stomping shoes because that's exactly what it is. Like, how do I get the kids to put the shoes on and get in the car when they don't like the feel of the socks or they don't like the shoes, and go, well, how about we turn into a game to go, the aim is not to get shoes and socks on. The aim is to actually boot the ball out the door to the car, but you have to wear your special shoes to do that. And in that way, you're gamifying. And gamifying is huge nowadays. I mean, people gamify everything. And if you can do that, then you are absolutely working with an ASI, within the ASI perspective. And I think we talked about in the previous episode about fidelity measures, child-led or client-led therapy, and using intrinsic motivation and finding the interests of the child. Use it. Play-based. I think that you absolutely can very much use ASI to support functional goals. I remember years ago, I worked with a young lad who had difficulty with toiling, and half of our sessions we spend time pretending we're going through an obstacle course that was that was this is going to sound strange, but was him starting in the bathroom and being the poo that was going down the certain things towards the toilet itself. And he loved it. He thought it was a great game. Now, I didn't explicitly work on challenges with toiling, but what we were doing was we were changing the perceptions around going to the toilet, and we're making it silly and fun, and sitting on the toilet was, we're sitting on a tunnel and pretending that we were doing our poo on the tunnel, and that it was the toilet into the underground sewers and stuff. And then what happened was the fear of sitting on that was taken away just purely because we made it into a bit of a game. And they were able to use that concept at home. So that's where generalization can occur through play.
Humour, so important.
Previous episode nod there as well. But so, I think going back to what we were saying at the start around, functional goals, I think ASI certainly does target a lot of those functional areas, and got a few examples in there as well. But I also hear that it's important to ensure that the goals of the family that might be, I want to specifically learn dressing or toileting or whatever it is, are also addressed in that way.
I think ASI is, that's primarily what we use here, but it is still one tool in a much broader toolbox, and we're using, we're OTs first, and it's about using the things that we have at our disposal to help clients work towards their goal areas.
Yeah.
I guess, we talked about, you ready for my segue? I feel pretty good about it. Talked about the sensory motor components that help function, but there's more to it as well, isn't there, when there's executive functioning skills and putting different steps together and all that kind of thing. And I know that we had a question around that as well, and how do we support executive functioning in an ASI space, which is probably a few similar concepts to what we talked about. You would work on that a lot with the clients that you have.
Yeah, we do.
At Plus.
So and I guess when we're working, I mean, you can work on executive functioning at all ages. I was actually talking to an AHA this morning about building skills for, this was more from a, using cognitive behavioural techniques for younger children, but using skills to build a person's capacity at a young age. You can start from a very young age. And executive functioning is not something, and we've talked about in the past, it's not something that just gets automatically just appears.
Yep.
It's something that is taught, and is something that needs to be modelled and supported and learnt. And when you can do that, then those skills become more apparent. And what are some of those executive functioning skills? We're talking about shifting between things, so flexibility, things like working memory, planning, organising, emotional control, initiation of a task, and impulsivity. These are all components that are also from certain executive functioning assessments. So we do one here. There's an assessment called the Brief, which looks at executive functioning skills, I guess, and it asks a parent, caregiver, or an individual, depending on the age, questions around that. So those key areas form part of executive functioning. And so I think for some people, in their mind, they think of executive functioning as, am I organised? Yeah. Can I get myself planned, and do I not have good planning skills? But it's so much more than that. There's a behavioural, cognitive, and a behavioural, cognitive, and what's the other one? Emotional. Yeah. Sorry, I was just like mental blank there. My executive functioning skills make me I struggle with that at times. But those components certainly are key. They're the three, the main areas. And within our OT sessions, we're working on that all the time. We might not explicitly sit down and go, okay, now we're going to work on working memory, or now we're going to work on shifting between tasks. Yeah. But we have to do that all the time.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
We're shifting between activities in our session. We are planning what we're going to do in this, say, for example, activity or obstacle course. We are managing emotions in win-loss.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Just persistence. Like the other day, it was yesterday, it was with a client who his persistence was actually pretty good. Like he gets very frustrated when things don't quite work, and we're trying to, I don't know if you know wedget blocks. People out there, they're called something else now. You can buy them on Amazon. It's hard to find wedget brand wedget blocks, but they're those color blocks are like green, yellow, blue, and red with a little white one. You can make pyramids and other designs out of them. And anyway, I was trying to get him to make an inverse pyramid. So obviously the smallest block at the bottom with the largest one on top, whilst he was in a platform swing, going backwards and forwards. So you can imagine that's quite a tricky task. And that was in one way to work on his motor skills, but another way to work on that the executive function of persistence and initiating and perseverating through a task. And even though there was a little bit of frustration, some swearing and other things, like he got through it. And I didn't actually redirect him to come back to that activity or to stay. He stayed there and he wanted to do it. Yeah. So there was enough motivation there to continue with it. But you could see after he'd finished it, there was this release of like, yes, I've done it. Yeah. Like, the relief and the release, but the relief of completing it, but also the sense of achievement that because I persisted through that. And that was the only feedback I really gave, was like, man, well done. Yeah. Like, you got through that. That was hard. Yeah. And I was happy to help you. And yes, I assisted at times, but you wanted to get through it, and I wasn't going to stop you from doing that. Yeah. And I think, that, in terms of understanding executive functioning within within our sessions and how we target that. That's just one example.
Yeah. I actually liked, you gave an example the other week where the activity where you're like, right, you've got these 5 items. Can you come up with an activity? Can you explain it to me? Can we adjust and model it? I felt like that included a lot of those elements that you just spoke to. I do something with another client actually where we'll go thinking about some of these items. We'll sit down at the start. It's like, you plan the session. We're going to choose 3 activities. Happy for you to have choice and control in what that looks like. We're going to spend this much time in those tasks, but you're in charge of letting us know when it's time to move on to the next activity. So it's not only in like the planning and the organisation of the entire session, but giving him a lot of autonomy in that cognitive flexibility, like to shift between the tasks, go, right, I've, set a timer on my watch. I can see it's time to move on to the next task. What items do I need for the game that I've got planned? What do I need to go and get to sort that out? And then being able to put all those steps together as well. So you're so right. I think there's so much that's built into those sessions, and there's probably a lot of things that we're scaffolding in without maybe even realizing, but there's, I think, opportunities to extend that further, to be like, I am here to support, but what a great way to practice this in a space that you're really motivated by, to then help with, when it comes to planning tasks at school and, okay, I've got this much time, what do I need to get done? How much time am I going to allocate to each? And try and, once again, it's that generalizing of those skills like we were talking about before. But for some where that's really tough, and yes, when we're at OT, that comes a little bit more easily, but that's harder to do in other spaces. So what's making that hard? What tools do I need? Is it a visual schedule or writing something down, using timers? How can I facilitate this given that I'm still building my capacities in these areas?
And I think that's it, isn't it? Is, as I said at the start of this, is that a lot of these skills they don't magically appear, they're learnt.
Yeah. They
have to be taught. And particularly for a lot of our clients that find this stuff really hard, if we're expecting them to automatically do it, it's not a just right challenge. We're setting them up to fail almost. And so whilst some of these things can be trickier, they can be taught. And you could ask any executive function coach, and there's a whole field, particularly in the adult world, about executive function coaching, and particularly for a neurodivergent population, some of these things are a lot harder. Doesn't mean they can't be done. It just means that strategies and techniques and things need to be put in place, and also being okay with some things are going to continue to be hard, and that's just not my strength, and I can accommodate with other things.
Yeah.
And I think that's important as well, is to know where your strengths are in this area, and being able to utilise those strengths to work in other ways too. So just like any other areas of function, and an FCA would look at components of executive functioning. It will look at components of daily living skills. This has been an episode that's really targeted a lot of stuff around day-to-day function.
Yeah,
but unless we have a good understanding of our sensory needs, and unless we have supports for the sensory systems, it gets very hard to be able to manage our executive function, and
for sure,
to be able to dress and do functional skills. So obviously, bias being a sensory integration based OT, but if we can better understand our sensory systems, we've got a better way of understanding what we need for our day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We can be reached via Instagram at OTFC Group. Otherwise, email podcast@otfcgroup.au. And any final thoughts? Anything else you wanted to add, Eleanor, before we sign off?
Nothing else to add.
No?
That's good.
Anything from Eli? No, we're all good. All right. Well, in that case, we will sign off and see everybody next time.
Thanks, everyone.